right. Good evening. I hope that everyone can see and hear me, but welcome to our conversation between David James Duncan and Michael Pietsch. I am Brian Christian. I am Senior Marketing Director for Little Brown here at Hachette Book Group. So I always like to give people a little bit of context about how things come to be. So for those of you who are not familiar with our process, books are in gestation for a very long time. And at work, we kind of start working on them about a year in advance, give or take. And that all happens at a meeting called launch, where the editors present the books to sales and marketing and publicity, and we learn what they're about. So usually behind the scenes, the marketing and publicity team, we're all like, oh, that's the book I want to work on. I want to work on that. I want to work on that. So there's a little jockeying. So me, having like a mild bit of authority, decided after hearing Michael speak about Son House that I was going to work on Son House. So now we're almost a year later, and we're very happy to have Michael, who is our CEO and the former publisher of Little Brown, and David's editor, here to discuss the book with him. And I also, before I turn it over, just wanted to do a little bit of Son House by the numbers. So 2 is the number of months until we're publishing the book, which is August 8th of this year. 31 is the number of years since The Brothers K was published. 762 is the number of pages of Son House. 40 is the number of hours of the audiobook. And just to give you some context, I looked this up. It takes 45 hours to drive straight from New York to Los Angeles. So that is something to keep in mind for your next road trip. And 8 is the number of narrators on the audiobook. So with that all said, I am going to turn this over to Michael and to David. And I'm going to figure out how to make myself go small. And
Brian, I can see you, but I can't see David. Is he here?
No, neither can I.
I wonder if he clicked the wrong button. David, are you somewhere around here? All right. Brian, I'm going to go ahead and start talking about the book and talking about David in the hopes that he's going to reappear magically.
Okay.
If when it gets to the time that he should be back here and he's not here, just let me know and we'll. I know you'll be working with him in the background to get him on the screen. But so he's not going to hear all the nice things I'm going to say about him. First, I wanted to say to everyone who's joining us here tonight, thank you for coming. I'm so excited to be here with you and able to talk about this book at long last. As Brian said, I'm Michael Pietsch. I'm the CEO of Hachette Book Group. I started life as an editor at Scribner's as an assistant there in 1979. And within 2 years of arriving there, I was trying to sign up a manuscript that I've been reading portions of called The River Why, which came in literally, and as they said in those days, over the transom. It was an unsolicited manuscript, dear editor. And I read these few pages and thought they were fabulous and asked for more and got more and went back and forth with David for a long time, tried to persuade Scribner's to sign this book up. And I failed. I tried and we got so close. And we had a brilliant correspondence, which I still carry around with me in a manila folder. I have it in a folder in my office. You can come see it, with my letters to him and with his letters to me and carbon copies, if you remember them, of my letters to him. It was such a delightful exchange. I still keep it with me. We got this close before I was finally told no by the publisher of Scribner at the time, and he said it's too long by half. And I told the publisher, I told David this awful news, and his letter in response was, well, I've got my chainsaw out. He didn't say whether he wanted it cut in half vertically or horizontally, but when you tell me which half he wants, then we'll go from there. So even at that moment, he had this great sense of humor that made me want to work with him. The book, as you know, is published by Sierra Club Press. The first time they'd ever published a novel. It was a great success. Still sells, thousands and thousands of copies a year. It was a formative book for many people in the Northwest in their engagement with nature and with higher things. And as Brian said, that was 40 years ago. And I have read David's books with enormous admiration and delight. And then 16 years ago, I got a phone call from a friend of his saying, it was Sherman Alexie, saying, David Duncan has a new novel in the works. Would you be interested in talking with him about it? And my head exploded, and I said yes. And we very quickly had a contract because I got to read the opening pages of this novel and thought, this is why I'm here. This kind of work is what I love more than anything. To have the privilege of working with a writer as they're bringing an enormous, exciting, deep new book into the world. So all those years ago, I began working with David, and I have to say that this 16-year journey we've been on, where I've gotten to read Son House as it emerged chapter by chapter, character by character, scene by scene, has been one of the deepest experiences I've ever had. I'm in awe of David's understanding of the world, of human nature, of how to tell a story, of the higher things, of his enormous learning, that he is a lifetime of learning about religious traditions distilled, compressed into this set of characters. This set of characters who are as alive as anyone you will ever encounter on the page. And the things I feel about this book are so big, it would be mortifying for all of us if I were to say them, because it would just sound too impossibly grandiose. So instead, I'm going to turn to a wonderful writer who I hope you know, named Leif Enger, the author of the brilliant novel Peace Like a River. Leif Enger wrote a novel, wrote a note about this book, which reads, "There are books that make you a happy insomniac, and Son House is absolutely one of them, like Quixote or Moby or Copperfield. The kind when you wake at 3 a.m, you remember that beside the bed is a 1,000-room mansion of a novel, where every door opens to unexpected weather and a keen sense of appetite. Here's the best part. While these characters come in all shades of funny and searching and rueful and indignant, they're all right there and as wide awake as you are. A new big book from James Duncan. This is a lucky time to be a reader." So those are Leif Enger's big thoughts about it, and I share them, that sense that this is really a book for the ages, which feels almost mortifying to say, but boy, am I happy to get to say it, and happy to be here, I hope, with David Duncan to talk about it. Has David arrived, Brian?
He has not, but I am pinging him, so.
Has he responded to your emails?
Wait, I think he is en route.
Yes, he's on the overpass. Well, I will say that another thing you might know about David is that along with his the two novels we've mentioned, he's the author of My Story is Told by Water, which was a National Book Award finalist, which is a partial memoir about his life connected to rivers, and he has devoted his life to saving rivers, to undamming rivers, to freeing salmon, to restoring that great natural cycle, which is at the heart of his first novel, The River Wye. He also brought to Little Brown a collection of essays, brilliant posthumous essays by Brian Doyle called One Long River Song, which I hope you know. So he helped that book come into being more recently. And I will say I've read this book more than any book I've ever read in my life, because when I first started working with him, I read the first 400 pages, and then he sent me another draft with 500 pages, and I'd always go back to the beginning and read from the beginning to see what he changed in the first part and then the new portion. And then so I've read the first 400 pages like 12 times, the first 600 pages 8 times, and the first 800 pages 4 times, and then the whole thing several times, as he has worked on it to make it realize everything he wanted to realize. Each chapter is introduced with an epigraph. If you haven't had a chance to see this galley, to read this galley, each of them is introduced with an epigraph from a poet, a religious writer. There's so much lore, religious lore from around the world in this book that he ended up adding a bibliography at the end to help people go find the readings, the text that his characters have drawn on. Excuse me. also has a dramatis personae, which not many books warrant, but or justify. But this book has such a rich and big cast of characters that we added a dramatis personae. And what else can I tell you about it? I've met David in person only one time. About a decade ago, my wife and I took our young son out on a vacation and drove across the West and ended up in Missoula. And David took us fly fishing, of course. I'd never held a fly rod in my life. And he cast and cast and let my 10-year-old son, our 10-year-old son, reel in these enormous trout that he'd managed to hook for him. It was an act of great generosity and delight for all of us. But it's an interesting experience working with a writer so intimately. The intimacy of working on a page with a writer as they're bringing a book into the world, you feel like you know them almost as deeply as you can know anyone. But then to only have had this one personal encounter feels strange, but also wonderful because I can picture him. I know what his house looks like. I know what the river he's writing about looks like. Any word, Brian?
Catherine and I are doing a little troubleshooting, and he's having a little trouble logging in, but we sent him a new link. So
Okay.
hopefully.
Well, I'm going to look at the chat and see if anyone has any questions that I could respond to while we wait for. One of them is, are there baseball references? This book is not big on baseball. It's big on a lot of things, and we'll talk about what it goes into, but baseball is not prominent. A favorite part of the book that you could describe for us, Julie? Thank you for that question. There's one part that's so favorite that I'm going to ask David to read. There's one scene that kind of opens up the top of my head every time I read it. I read it twice today, and we're going to ask David to read that aloud to us. There is a chapter in which a young Sanskrit student who's learning to notice the world through her encounters with these mystics and religious writers of the Far East. She notices a bee fly into a flower in a rainstorm. And this storm, because it's in the Northwest, lasts for 3 days. And she keeps checking in on this bee alive in this flower and hears it barely humming. And just keeps coming back, and finally is there when the sun comes out and finally dries out the flower enough that he sees the bee still alive emerge, shake the pollen on its legs, and fly off. And that attention to that beautiful attention to a moment, being present in the moment, and trying to understand what's happening in life at that moment is it's one of the many places that the book captures that.
Hello?
I hear David.
We hear
You can
David.
hear me? Oh my God.
Oh, David, you poor person. You poor person.
Why
Thank
wouldn't
you
it
for
let me
making-
in?
It's
This lady behind me, she jinxed me.
It was all too easy until then. Well, I've been telling people the story of how I first encountered each other and what it's been like to work with you on this book. And it's probably just as well that you weren't there, because your ears would be burning and your head would be spinning and you'd be blushing at some of the praise that I've been. But I will just say to you briefly and in person, or almost in person two-dimensionally, that this has been one of the ecstatic experiences of my life, working with you on this book and bringing it into the world now, and understanding that others are going to get to experience this extraordinary work that you've created fills me with joy. And so thank you for being here with us. And I'm going to start.
Thrilled. It's so mutual, Michael. I mean, this book would not be out there if it wasn't for you, my friend.
It would be here, and it would be great. So I'm gonna ask you first. I'm gonna start with an impossible question. But this is what everyone here in the business of books has to deal with all the time. So you've devoted almost 2 decades to create this 800-page novel, and here we've got an audience of people whose job it is to convey what that book is to their customers in 15 seconds. I mean, literally, that's what we get. 15 seconds. Like, tell me what it is, why you should buy it. So give us, you've got one sentence. What do you say? What do you say about this book when you've got one sentence to describe it?
That rather than an op-ed call for a change in our consciousness, it is trying to bring the novel's ability to give us five senses and be present in the moment and bring that to the story rather than just a frustrated cry for another op-ed that says, we must be nice to each other, or, you know, whatever. And trying to embody change as it's happening to people over and over and over. Significant changes, shifts of perspective or consciousness, including mystical experiences, which I wouldn't write about. I feel like a fool when I do, but I have them myself. So I don't know how else to handle it.
Thank you. I think you sold the book. And just before you came on, I was asked about a favorite scene from the book. And speaking of being present in the moment, I was describing Risa and the bumblebee.
Oh, yeah.
As a favorite moment in the book.
Yeah.
So the biggest, most of this novel is for me dealing with people who are trying to find a way to live a right life, a good life, and to connect with higher understandings and with God, if for some, in a world that doesn't really offer paths that are easy, where traditional religions don't work for many people, it's a huge undertaking to write about, you know, the mysteries of the universe and the meaning of death and the meaning of love. As this book formed in your mind, did bringing such a huge subject to life daunt you?
It didn't daunt me if I took the terminology away from all the traditional forms of Christianity. Like when I refer to God, it's the unseen, unborn, guileless perfection from the Vedas, and I love adding the word guileless. I just picture an infant in a manger, not some mean, long-bearded, angry Republican in heaven, you know. And so so the book has a little different flavor. We don't see that Republican at all. And when I do reference the word God, it's usually in the mouths of people like Julian of Norwich, or the Beguines, who often referred to a female God that was just as valid as a male God. And in fact, God is probably, I mean, I'm not going to say, but genderless seems kind of safe too, or multi-gendered, or, you know, mysterious. Let's just get that word in there right now. It's a mystery that it makes fools of our attempts with language. But things can be said that can be felt. And I was just going for that for 16 years, as you know.
Yeah.
I remember how touched I was, Michael, when Risa had the moment where she experienced the eagle that John at the Cross writes about. And she says, don't you know how corny it is in this stupid country, especially to depict yourself as an eagle? But John just keeps his eagle just keeps bombarding her, and until she's hiding in her shower. And you said, I don't know how this happened, but I was so moved by that scene. And that's when I really felt I had some solid ground beneath. I was very happy that you were a Jack Catholic when I first found out you'd be editing me. And thank God not a devout Roman Catholic, because I'm pretty hard on that institution in this book. So, yeah. I'm
optimistic that devout Roman Catholics will read this with delight and love as well, because you're hard on them. The heart of the book is so enormous and pure, and I don't see any limits. I think Republicans, I don't see any limits to the audience that can find themselves enraptured by this book. Mm-hmm. I've been asked by a couple of people when I named the book Son. When I tell them the name, they go, "Oh, is it about music? Is it about Son House the blues artist?" And it's a question you're going to get a lot. So why don't you answer it here? Is the play on that name intentional, and is music part of the book, and if so, why?
It's very intentional. Reese's father was a freedom writer during Jim Crow, and what he brought back from that was just a love for Delta blues. He didn't become an activist. He was a very smart guy. He went to the Kennedy School, but he loved the blues. he's a very handsome devil, and he's a bit of a philanderer, and he adores Risa, but he's the proverbial says he's there for you and he isn't father, and causes her a lot of pain in that way. But she has these very fond memories of when his marriage was disintegrating and her mother would go out on the town. He would play blues records and narrate them. And then he tells a story about the first time he ever heard a glass slide on steel strings. And that was played by Son House after a bar fight in which he picked up a broken wine bottle, tried fingers until it fit on the fourth, and he started making it crash and really play loud. And then he suddenly just damped it down to one note that he was hitting with that glass. And the whole bar fight went quiet. And it's a terrible scene to summarize because it really works. So I'm going to stop right now.
Yeah. And there's music all through the book in many other ways, including some song lyrics that you have created out of the voice of one of the characters. This novel I've described it as a novel of big ideas, but it's a novel of people. And you're describing these characters as you know, clearly as if they were alive and factual. It's a bunch of different people who don't start out knowing each other, except two of them are brothers, who are each on their own way trying to find what matters to them and understand life and connect with higher things, and they come together. There's not enough time to do much more, but I just wonder, would you just tell us about two of these characters, two of your favorite characters, and give us a few words about who they are? Maybe Jamie.
Yeah, Jamie Van Zandt he becomes an actor, but the huge event in his life is that his mother dies on his 5th birthday, in practically the same room in the same hospital where he was born. And the cruelty of that coincidence, and also the pretty terrible death, she died slowly of leukemia, breaks his heart, but breaks his heart in a way that leads to a lot of rage. And I've known so many people who've lost loved ones early, and that can often be. I had quite a bit of rage when my brother died when I was 13. He was my hero. Suddenly he was gone, and Mickey Mantle was signing us a baseball that was dated on my brother's birthday and arrived on the day he was being embalmed. So I know the frustration of here was this honorific thing that probably made things a little bit worse. But then later, David Gernert was doing Mickey's My Favorite Summer, the same time that I'd written that essay, and Mickey asked David about it and said, "Oh, David Duncan isn't making fun of you at all. He's just trying to describe how he felt when you gave him this ball that didn't necessarily make him feel better. So that's why he calls it a koan, which is like a riddle that you try to work out, a spiritual riddle." And the Mick said, "That makes sense. I like that." And that, to me, that's one of the best book reviews I ever got. Yeah.
That's Jamie. I'm going to jump. There's another character, and I'm mortified to say that her name is not in me right now, but it's the one book of poems length marriage.
Right, Laura Lee.
Laura Lee. Tell us about Laura Lee.
Yeah. Laura Lee loves mountains in the way someone who likes, I'm going to say it wrong because I'm sorry, I'm from the part of the country where we say it wrong, Appalachian music. She likes that kind of folk music and is a music major in college, but she falls in love with a man whose love for mountains is based on climbing them, summiting peaks, scaling very difficult rock walls. Their marriage lasts a while, but that section of the book kind of gives away what happens. The one book of poems linked to marriage, that's how long it lasts. And when she really interests me is the way she begins to find her way after the divorce she really begins to become who she is. When she has this realization that she's been kind of worshiping all these first string Buddhists like Joan Halifax and Gary Snyder and the Dalai Lama, she suddenly realizes, hey, I can get off the bench and be a first string Buddhist too. And she finds her courage, and her relationship is mostly through the Zen Buddhist master Dogen's Mountains and Water Sutra, and a literal love for mountains, where she goes to mountains for inspiration, and even co-writes songs with this mountain that she has lived on for years and befriended in the way that Dogen says it's possible to befriend mountains. They can be like an enlightened teacher to you if you can find that kind of connection.
Her journey, her solo journey across that mountain, which ends with these songs pouring through her.
Yeah.
It was just a transcendent passage. I worship that. Forgive me for saying worship. I find that always amazing to read, as so many of passages in this book or scenes in this book are.
Somebody said it isn't fair that Michael makes us cry every time he speaks. You're about to do that to me when you call that transcendent.
Well, it's a book. It's an extremely emotional book. This book takes death.
Yeah.
This book takes on death full on, and finds it just goes to the deepest places that books can go. So it's okay. It's okay to cry. Part of the book, one of the sections of the book is called Eastern Western, which I know I think for a while you even contemplated as a title for the book. I may be wrong, but it's a big idea, the Eastern as an adjective and Western as a noun. And so tell me how that adjective and that noun come together in this book.
Well, one thing that happened was that you wanted the novel to be called Eastern Western, and I wrote you a 3-page letter describing why it had to be named.
Why it was wrong. Yes. Okay. You were absolutely right.
And but it kind of follows the trajectory of my life. I was having really big experiences young. I just have to call them spiritual experiences for lack of a better term. And when I went to India, that really escalated. And when I came back from India, I wanted to keep what I had found there alive. And the place where I found I could do that was in Western wilds, in high desert river canyons, on high mountain ridge lines, never as a guy who wanted to summit a peak. I mean, I just think one of the dumbest things you can do is climb Mount Everest for $500,000 and have a Sherpa drag you to the top. I mean, so what? But the kind of relationship that various mountain wanderers have had, I'm much more attracted to that, I guess, just because I've always been a mountain wanderer, and they're just such astounding places. The changes that we're experiencing here in the higher places in Montana right now are just sensational. There's a kind of wildflower. It's a phlox that only blooms on one ridge in Missoula, Montana, and school children come from all over the place to go see this flower when it's in full bloom. And that kind of reverence for these little machinations of Mother Nature just are really pleasing, and they're endless. And so it keeps. It's the Vedas are so beautifully grounded in nature, and it keeps those kinds of truths. It's a real two-way street between beautiful wild places and wisdom literature. Also, when I lived on the Oregon coast, it was temperate rainforest, and the person to read there is Lao Tzu, the Tao Te Ching in temperate rainforest. It's just a perfect wedding between that sage and that climate.
Thank you. One of my favorite concepts in the novel is something called dumpster Catholicism, and it's so big and real in the book that at one point I asked you, "Does that exist out in the world?" And you said, "No, I made it up." So tell everyone what dumpster Catholicism is.
It was an invention of a street person who becomes a holy fool.
In the novel,
he becomes the holy fool in the novel after a little bit of a violent scene that Michael wants me to read a piece of later. But he dumpster Catholicism. Jervis is frustrated because he loves Catholic saints. He loves St. Francis and Clare especially, and had an experience about them when he was in their part of Italy. But he's extremely frustrated with the bureaucratic approach of the Vatican, and also the complete failure to protect children from horny priests, and even Pope Rottweiler. I'm sorry, that's not his real name, but one of the popes not defending children, but shuffling around, playing a shell game, moving around pedophile priests, and we all know that stuff. But Jervis still loves the good things that have happened in the church, that he just suddenly realizes dumpster Catholicism. If we looked at all the things the Roman Catholic Church, especially since the God of Reason that, wiped out 1,000 native tribes, if we looked at the things that the church has saved versus the things that is thrown in the dumpster, Jervis says the dumpster is so much better than what's left in the church. And we could have the greatest spiritual yard sale on earth if we started pulling stuff out of the dumpster. And so he explores the people who did not write the official history of the Roman Catholic Church, but the people who were thrown out, because their perspectives are much more interesting. It takes you to places like the book Black Elk Speaks. There was a lot of Catholicism around Black Elk, but he's got to, once the ruling powers have committed attempted genocide on your people and thrown your children in horrible schools that sometimes had mass graves and completely tried to erase everything about your identity, your language, those crimes are so enormous that it gave Jervis this feast that he could call on to describe all the beautiful things that we've lost because of the decisions made by a pack of extremely misogynistic men in red beanies. And
right.
So,
and especially those believers who cherished a direct connection to divinity without going through the intercession of the church. The Beguines, that direct connection is a huge part of this book. And that leads me to the passage I want to ask you to read. Now this is a passage David asked me to say a couple words before he plunges into it. It's just 2 pages, but well, you'll see. He wanted to revive at least one of the great time-honored characters of medieval literature, the Holy Fool. He knows 2 men who came close to being such fools, and serious injuries are what created the resemblance. It's relevant to the scene that Jervis, the character here, adores a Beguine mystic named Marguerite, who he calls my dearest M in the scene, whose love for the divine was deemed heresy by the Catholic Church, causing her to be burned at the stake. And so if you have the galley, David is going to read from us the passage. You can read along from page 185 at the top.
It's, Behind the blue dumpster in the parking lot's far corner, Jervis heard a thud, followed by an eerie gasp. Thinking a drunk might have tried to dumpster dive, then fallen in and hurt himself, Jervis strode fast toward the sound. Rounding the dumpster's corner, he was stunned to find a man lying on his back on the asphalt, bleeding from the head and mouth, with 2 more men standing over him. Both men, to his consternation, were wearing yellow kitchen gloves. One man wielded a 4-foot length of 2x4, the other a steel kryptonite bike lock. Both were sweating from the exertion of the beating they were administering. The downed man had shattered-looking hands and was reduced to holding his feet in the air to try to ward off the next blow. Before Jervis could think or shout, one of the men took a tremendous wood chopper's swing, powering the thin side of the 2x4 down onto the fallen man's shin. The cracking of bone was audible. His defenses collapsed. The bike lock swinger took immediate advantage, landing a terrible spray-spattering blow to the head. The downed man went limp. On the Catholic worker calendar beneath which Jervis had breakfasted that morning, Mother Teresa, hunched in a Calcutta alley, caressing the intact cheek of a leper whose other cheek had collapsed into a festering hole. The eyeball above the missing cheek seemed to gaze incredulously at the camera, an effect due not to amazement, but to an enormous fraction of missing face. Below the photo, Mama T was quoted saying, "I know God will not give me anything I can't handle. I just wish he didn't trust me so much." For the first time in his life, Jervis experienced the example of his hero, not as an inspiration, but as a weight as horrifically heavy as his childhood church's lust for other people's gold. He shouldered that weight even so. He began by clearing his throat. 2x4 and Kryptonite turned to see a man step from behind the blue dumpster, walk toward them, and stop not 6 feet away. His proximity, of course, led them to study him more closely. He stood about 5'3" and weighed maybe 130 pounds. He had a hunched posture, a premature tonsure, and wispy dark blonde side hair that floated around his skull like the tail feathers of a bizarre jungle bird. He wore red flip-flops, a pair of torn dark green gym shorts he'd salvaged from a park, and a chartreuse t-shirt with crimson letters that read, "Dyslexics are teeple poo." Instead of the revolver, I really like that. That's called a spoonerism. Teeple poo. Instead of the revolver or sawed-off shotgun he would have needed to dissuade the thugs from their little murder project, he held a small bag of groceries in one hand and a double video in the other. Looking hopeful, the video is The Seven Samurai. Looking hopeful, the little fellow brandished the video at them, revealing an image of a Japanese actor wielding a dangerous-looking sword. The thugs scowled at the image almost politely, as if giving the sword-bearing actor a chance to blow himself up into 3 dimensions, leap from the box, and join the teeple poo guy in defense of their victim. But Toshiro Mifune is no fool. He remained fixed to the box. Scores of Portlanders, upon reading newspaper accounts of the tragedy about to unfold, would say that Jervis had been an idiot not to run in safe circles around the parking lot shouting, "Help, police, help!" What the second guessers forget is that when a person in love with love sees and hears a 2x4 break leg bone, a bike lock blast skin, hair, blood, and a bizarre material he fears could be brain from a shattering skull, common sense is shattered by the same blows, leaving nothing in its place but uncommon sense. Jervis stepped. This is the part that's hard to read. Jervis stepped forward, straddling the victim before another blow could fall. For several seconds, no movement but the heaving chests of the thugs, the trembling of Toshiro Mifune in Jervis's hand, the blood pooling impossibly red on asphalt, but the thug's eyes had gone reptilian. The Beguine Marguerite, Jervis thought, bound to the stake, the eyes of her inquisitor. Sensing his body was about to be unmade, knowing his next words could be his last, Jervis invoked Marguerite with all his might. "This soul," he told the thugs, "has 6 wings like the seraphim." How little metaphysics changes physics. Chitter of sparrows, coo of doves, starlings straining to be meadowlarks, Jervis straining to be Marguerite. In a high trembling voice that sounded doomed even to himself, he said, no longer knowing how to speak, obeying no created thing but love, I tell you for your own sakes, leave this man, his soul, its wings, go. The thugs had heard enough. 2x4 jerked his head to one side. Kryptonite nodded and stepped to Jervis's right. 2x4 left. No way to watch them both as they eased toward him. God created an impossible situation. The last word Jervis heard in what he now calls my former incarnation, spoken by Kryptonite, checkmate. His last thought, it's over. My life, it's over. His last sensation before the blow that shattered his arm, then the flash that took his consciousness. an impossible eruption from inside the mothering earth. Exploding up his legs, buttocks, hardening penis, up his back, neck, head. Blasting out the sun door at the top of his skull in an unstoppable flood of joy.
David, thank you for reading that passage. I know it's intense, but I've wept over that passage a dozen times. It's beautiful, 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 and one of the many, many hearts of the book. So thank you for that. Now we're going to. I'm going to get out of the way and let you all talk to David. And the way we're going to do this is that Brian is going to read questions from the. He's going to troll through this chat and find questions and read them aloud for David to respond to. So Brian, right. Take it away. People, ask David the questions you have in your mind.
Lots of thanks. And I send my thanks, David. No questions?
I'm sure there's always a lot of questions after the first question. It's the first one that's hard.
Any reference or inspiration from your friend BD?
Thanks, Brian. I was about to go to that question about the other Brian. Brian Doyle read a lot of Son House and had extremely kind things to say about it. And was really looking forward to it. So, it's a heartbreak that he'll never, see it intact. But we were so close, and there have been so many amazing things that happened between us, not just at the end of his life, but even beyond. Like when I was working on the book of Brian's best nonfiction, One Long River of Song, right after I mailed the manuscript to Little Brown, I had a vivid dream of meeting up with Brian in what the Dalai Lama calls the clear light. At least that's how it seemed, because I couldn't see any sun, but the light was really bright. And Brian had taken a copy of One Long River of Song, and he'd broken it down into all those perfectly symmetrical pieces of writing he called proems, which were prose poems. And he was reclaiming the book by taking everything we'd done for him, Chip Blake, Katie Yale, and I, and bringing it back just into his own hands in this beautiful light. And he had this little kind of llama bleat that he would do all the time when he was happy, just kind of, It was way better than that. It was like a mother llama the first time it's baby nurses or something, but he was doing that. And then he said, yeah, it was a little, I left out the best point. He had 3 pens. He had a green pen, a blue pen, and a red pen. And he would add a word to a line in green, and it's like the aura of Mother Nature would burst from the whole page, and you just feel like Mother Nature is so unstoppable that even if there's a bunch of mass extinctions, we're going to make it through. And then he'd pull out the blue, and of course, it would turn into the great African American blues form, the blues. The whole paragraph that he had charmed with this one word in the clear light, which just changed its mood and became this really beautiful bluesy thing. And then the red was about blood sacrifice, like really daunting pieces Brian wrote, like The Leap, where 2 people are leaping from the trade towers holding hands, or Dawn and Mary, about the 2 women that ran at the shooter at Sandy Hook. And nobody wrote short pieces like that. I mean, they're they're almost impossible to read. Brian just really had a gift for that kind of deep empathy. And yeah.
David, there have been a lot of questions that have come in during that answer. So the first one unleashed everyone's.
So, like, I think I can get several questions into one through this one. Like, what motivated you across this exercise of prayer and focus?
I'm extremely grateful for the life that I've had, and I feel especially grateful. Well, I feel grateful for so many things. It's an infinite list, but I have two really wonderful daughters, and one of them was an environmental studies major, and I've seen how much weight is placed on the young by the older who have lost hope and perhaps become cynical. And I wanted to write a really ambitious book that would console in ways that the young haven't even thought of, and not leave my daughters depressed. And so that's what I busted my ass for 16 years trying to do.
Wow. I'm just going to insert here that this book is the anti-cynical bomb. It's David wears all his hearts on all his sleeves, and this book is just heart, and no cynicism. I love that about it.
I think you answered most of this, but the question's just written so beautifully. I wanted to read part of it. Like, where does this uncommon insight and magical use of language come from? But I feel like you've kind of covered some of that.
Well, to a huge extent, language comes from the things that you've read that just knock your socks off. And I've read so much wisdom literature, and it's really dense. A lot of people know I adore Meister Eckhart, but I adore him for tangible reasons. Like, I was reading his sermon, God Laughs and Plays, in a food stamp office, and it just felt so ridiculous to me, looking around at the deliberately depressing furniture, office furniture, and the just low feeling in the room. And God Laughs and Plays, I don't need to wait around for this shit. And I would go to the dented can warehouse, and if the can exploded, I didn't eat it. But if it didn't, it was like 10-cent Campbell's chicken noodle soup, And so I was good at being bored.
Like, literally.
Yeah.
Can I back up to a question that we've scrolled past, which I really want to hear you answer, which is, what traditional Western novels did you look to as you were writing, or did you look to any? What did you aim to keep from the genre, and what do you seek to rewrite, erase, leave behind?
I was already moved by the novels that shaped Son House. One, I don't have an unadulterated love for Tolstoy's War and Peace, but I have a huge respect for it. And he's somebody who can, one thing he does women really believably. He writes some of the best women in certainly Russian lit, and maybe in any lit. And he also has these shifts in perspective where, when Prince Andrei is dying on the battlefield, he's going through changes of consciousness like crazy. And Hermann Hesse's best novels have some of the same. Yeah, and so it was books that, I love Arundhati Roy's The God of Small Things. To get a woman into the mix here, it's just a gorgeous book. You think it's over, then there's one of the most gorgeous sex scenes ever written when you thought the book was done. It's like, whoa. I guess maybe there's a chapter late in Son House when you think maybe you're not going to find that.
Then it comes. I was
stealing a trick from Arundhati Roy. Yeah.
Oh, that's great. I wondered if this question was asking about the novel, the genre of the Western novel, meaning the American, the Zane Grey tradition. Is that in here anywhere?
It is. There's an epigram where Zane Grey is talking about the classic Western hero riding to the top of a ridge and looking glorious, and then up trots whoever the woman character is on her pathetic little burro, just looking kind of out to lunch. And the next little quote epigram is the Buddha saying, I have heard this knowledge and it falls short of the absolute, or something like that.
Yeah. Catherine asked me in a side conversation, what religious philosopher do you recommend we read as a companion to Son House?
Well, I have friends, Chris Dombrowski, a writer here, who was a fishing guide to Michael, Janet, and Michael's son Owen once here. And Chris loves Zen Master Dogen, and I love Meister Eckhart. And we ended up kind of flip-flopping and reading the other two. But Chris would do this game where he would send me quotes from Dogen or Eckhart, and I had to guess which of the two it was. And I never missed one of those questions. They're so distinctive, even though their knowledge is so similar. And yeah, that's a dumb test I passed that I'm really arrogantly proud of, you know? As I talk about humility, you know.
Sabrina was wondering about if you practice Buddhism, and what do you hope Americans who are so often materialistic and striving can get from this book?
I can only answer one question at a time. I'll forget the second one by the time I've asked
it. I can bring you back.
Okay. Yeah, I've had an interesting relationship with Buddhism. So many people became Buddhists who were frustrated, you know, with the God of fundamentalism, especially. It's just, who needs that guy, you know, and who needs all the judgmentalism and people so cocksure that they have the truth that it's like somebody seeing the sun and yelling at you 100 yards away, you have to come over here where I'm standing because I can see the sun, you sinner, get over here, you know, fuck that shit. And on the first day of college, I met a man who looked at that time like a leprechaun with long golden beard, long golden hair, and he was an aspiring Jesuit who became a Trappist monk. But when I was still just 18 years old, just at the end of the first month of college, we went together to a Trappist monastery that I visited a lot. And that is the monastery, and the man who was for a long time a novice master and then the abbot, Father Bernard, was a dear friend to us both. And he was once at a gathering of spiritual luminaries down in San Francisco, people like Sufi Sam and Alan Watts and whoever was, you know, kind of hot stuff at the time. And Bernard found himself just like backing up, wishing he could meld into the wallpaper. And then he noticed, he was a big man, he noticed kind of down under his elbow was this small Japanese man, and it was Shinryo Suzuki. And they became great friends, and Bernard brought Zazen meditation to the Trappist Abbey. And a couple of delightful times I sat with the monks, you know, like at 2:30 in the morning before they get up at 4, you know. But it was just, felt like such an adventure to sit with these devout Catholics who had fallen in love with this method of meditation. So I'm a neither. But I've taken a lot of pleasure from, I mean, Jane Hirschfield's a friend. She has poems that are like little sutras. They're just so perfect. When Your Life Looks Back, look up a Jane Hirschfield poem called When Your Life Looks Back. What a gorgeous, gorgeous poem.
Thank you. Can I jump in with one? This is from Julie Isrig. I'm moved by that line in what you just read, that the character is in love with love. How do you define capital L, love?
Yeah, there's different levels. I mean, there's so many theories about love. I'm just kind of a bliss ninny about love and don't like to get very academic. Like C.S. Lewis has a book called The Four Loves, where he's going into great detail about the difference between, I don't know, fraternal love and affection and romantic love, which is just so, what I like in Lewis is his book Surprised by Joy, where a communist named Joy Davidman, he fell madly in love with her, and it was Eros, old C.S. Lewis, who thought it was proper to use your rug as an ashtray, year in and year out. He just fell for this woman, and I don't know where I'm going with that, except I just love it that this scholarly man, who I do admire, became enamored of this woman till the last day of her life.
So David, I have like a small, short surprise for you. You brought your own words to life, but I had been bugging our audio colleagues about how it was all going. So I have like a little bit of video of the narrator who actually voices Jervis, and
you've got a great love inside you. A love you'll never make love to. A love pregnant with a baby you didn't choose. A love that breaks you more and more open year after year. To stay so open, knowing you'll never be your love's one and only, has got to hurt like hell. And I'm sorry for your hurt. But I'm amazed by your faith. You're not munched like me. You don't feel ocean all day the way I do. Your faith is greater than mine, Teach. So let's do a double Salinger and watch. Knowing we've got cool stuff to do, and soon. Stay with Ocean, brother. It's gonna get good. I don't know just how or when, but it is. She promises. When you're my Jervis, Risa's my Risa, and Ocean's my Ocean, what choice do I have, brother? What choice do I ever have?
oops.
David, there's an unmute button at the bottom of your screen right next to your initials.
Oh, there we go. Yep.
There you go.
I was just saying that when I heard Joe, that I got to cast some of the readers for the audiobook, and when I heard Joe doing Jervis, I just started to cry.
Oh,
I thought I'd never. It was him, Joe.
Yeah.
Joe does him. I also heard there's a fellow who was helping who was Mr. Sister to the wonderful woman in charge of making these wonderful audiobooks. And that's an inside joke for people who know about Jervis and Risa, but a Mr. Sister, yeah, fun idea.
yeah.
A little gender ambiguity going there.
Yeah.
So we have just a little over a minute left, which I'm going to cede to Michael for whatever purpose he has.
My only purpose is to say thank you to all of you for coming and for being interested in this book and for joining us at this sort of the headwaters of this journey. Forgive me for mixing the metaphors, David. You're the writer.
Yeah.
But thank you for being part of this and for helping us spread the word about this book that I think is going to do great good, and I hope sell a lot of copies and bring happiness and understanding and wisdom to people. And thank you most of all to David for having poured yourself into this book for so long. And I have one last question. We're all wondering, are you working on a new novel? Is it going to take another 30 years?
I do have a novel in progress, but there are two easy books that I want to do first.
Okay.
One is a novella, all in rhyming verse, and
all right.
it's my last attempt to try. It's like a graphic novel, if I can find an illustrator, but it's my last attempt to try to do something for the wild salmon and orcas that we're losing in the Pacific Northwest, and it goes back mythologically to ancient Scotland and brings a river goddess to the United States and into the dams and the fish passage, fish and the BPA's mentality. And she really kicks some ass.
Cannot wait to read that, to publish that, and to work with you on that. David, thank you. We're all enormously in your debt.
Thanks,
And
everyone.
have a great night.
You're my favorite. Thank you. And thank you, everyone, for joining us.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.